welcome to the first seminar of the Testimonies from the War this year in 2025. And we are honored to have our guest from Australia. We are happy that we managed to accommodate this change of our usual time. So, Iryna, I'm glad we have you at our seminar. And Iryna is the topic of our today's talk is, let me read it. So, women and materiality amidst Russia's war in Ukraine, between survival, belonging, and solidarity networks. And I need to admit that when I first realized what Iryna is focusing her research on, I was fascinated because first, she's not a historian of contemporality, as many of us are not, which means that she changed a bit or accommodated her topic to what's happening now in Ukraine, in the world. And this is also a case of many of us. So I'm a historian of I'm an oral historian of the Second World War and of the Holocaust. And this is the first time I'm doing the research on what's happening now with oral history tools. And also many people in my team are historians or sociologists who actually changed their focus, their research focus, because of what happened in 2022. So I think that this is what we have in common, and this is why I wanted to hear more about Iryna's professional development. But also the topic is fascinating, the materiality, the things, objects that are left behind, that are taken, that are being missed, remembered, of course, in women perspective, because most of the refugees are women. So when I heard what's Iryna's topic, I thought that we must have her during one of our seminars, and I will now formally introduce Iryna. So Iryna Skubii is the inaugural Mykola Zerov Fellow in Ukrainian Studies at the University of Melbourne. Her research examines the history of consumption, material culture, and human-environmental relationship during the Soviet famines in Ukraine, within the broader context of the Soviet history and the period of extremes. So this is the period of extremes, and I'm looking forward to hear how Iryna is building these bridges in our understanding of what's happening now and what happened before. She's working on the monograph Survival Under Extremes, Human, Environmental, and Material Relationships Amidst the Soviet Famines in Ukraine. And in her new research we'll hear about in a minute, she examines the economic, environmental, it's a difficult word, and cultural history of sunflowers in Ukraine. And I forgot, of course, to introduce myself. So whoever does not know it, my name is Anna Velegała. I'm chairing this seminar, and I'm the leader of the Polish part of the Testimonies from the War project. And we have several members of our, I think, at least Polish and Ukrainian, but also Luxembourgish team on board. So Iryna, the floor is yours. We'll have your talk now, and then we'll move to the questions from the audience. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Anna, and everyone, for first of all for inviting me. It's a great honor to present my first results of this research to this audience that works specifically with these testimonies, with oral histories, with ongoing war in Ukraine. Before I go into details, I would like to share a presentation and start specifically with my research. Can you see it? Okay. Okay. So again, thank you so much, everyone, for organizing this amazing opportunity for me to share the results of this research. And I'm also very grateful for everyone who joined from different countries, like from Ukraine. I see many familiar faces of colleagues here. Also people from Ukrainian diaspora in Australia, Europe. It's a pleasure to see you, everyone here. And thank you for finding time in joining us today. And also I should say that I'm very grateful to have this opportunity to speak specifically from the University of Melbourne from Australia. as Mykola Zerov Fellow in Ukrainian Studies and Association of Ukrainians in Victoria for supporting this position and funding this position that allowed me to work here. And as Anna mentioned, I should also say from the very beginning that studying the history of war was not my specialty. I was trained as economic historian, scholar in economics, social history, recently famine studies, environmental history, so like military topics and war, violence, all of this was outside of my focus until recently. And when I started also like working around 5 years ago on the topic of Holodomor and Soviet famines in Ukraine, I also noticed and developed this research direction on materiality of survival that is looking into material objects that help people to survive. And when I was also like following news and listening and reading many personal stories of those people who escaped war zone or fly to Europe or were displaced in Ukraine, I also noticed that all of these stories also could be told from the perspective of material objects and also from the perspective of human material relations in such extreme circumstances as we can name such periods as war, famine, other catastrophes, and different types of crimes and genocides. And I assume that, as Anna mentioned, this connection might seem for some unexpected from the first glance, but in this picture is taken from Kharkiv region a few months ago in Borova district, now Kupiansk district in east of Kharkiv region. You see this materiality of war that became already familiar to many of us. Indeed, war and its materiality are commonly associated with massive bombs, deadly missiles, piles of rubble, and boarded up windows of abandoned houses. While such materiality is publicly visible, as we could see here from this photo, across Ukrainian urban and rural spaces, there is also another layer to it, materiality of everyday life during war, which is much less noticeable. It's not publicly visible. Usually it's just hidden in a personal suitcase or small bag with which a person is flying from a war zone. And thus I think that aiming to shed light on this less visible side of everyday life and material culture amid the war, it is possible to focus on everyday survival, individual and family objects, as it became a way to personal history of the war. Also, you might remember some other examples not related specifically to Ukraine, for instance, but other histories of refugees in Europe and across the world. For instance, there were quite many discussions about stories about Syrian refugees who arrived to Europe and different countries with cell phones, life jackets, and toys. And those stories were very caused lots of discussions and attention in public space. Another example, all of you might also know, was related now to Ukrainian refugees who started arriving in Europe in 2022. Those stories were also related to their material objects and different valuables that they brought with themselves. And when I started thinking about this topic, I was specifically focusing initially from the history of extreme survival, famine survival, materiality, in the context of Ukrainian history, but then I noticed that there's actually a big scholarship in this area, could be named as materiality of war. And you might know some scholars, some of them much more familiar, some are less, like Laura Ausulander and Tara Zara wrote in 2018, I guess, a book, Objects of War, The Material Culture of Conflict and Displacement, which I highly recommend you. It's edited volume which shed light on some theoretical, methodological, and case studies that are useful for understanding how to study objects of war. And more relevant to a field of Soviet studies and Eastern European studies is a book by Brendan Schechter, The Stuff of Soldiers, that is focusing on soldiers short as a way to understand the history of war, and mostly the history from the perspective of men soldiers. Also, there is, as you can see on the slide, scholarship on the First World War and some other studies on how to understand witness accounts, storytelling, and memories through by looking at material objects. That is might be interesting for the scholars in this online room who are studying specifically oral testimonies. And looking from this perspective and from perspective of famine studies in particular, which was my main direction into this research, I started looking into oral testimonies that were becoming available publicly. And I noticed certainly that most of these testimonies are focusing on women's stories. So certainly in this context, the rationale of studying women was very clear, and it could be explained on this graph. According to the most recent statistics, on the 31st of October 2024, around 45%, as you can see, of displaced persons in Europe were women. 32% were men, and 32% were children, and 23% were men. And also, since women make up the majority of Ukraine's displaced population, when trying to understand the predominant histories of refugees and their personal stories and relationship with material objects, it is important first to start looking from their experiences and then expand this focus into other social groups. So today I'm focusing only on women. And what brought also me to this particular seminar was the way how I started looking to documentation and oral history projects. And I first reached out to Center of Urban History and Natalia Tryshenko, who shared with me some sample of testimonies with women that they collected as a part of testimonies from the war project. And also Natalia shared with me contacts with Anna, and I reached out to Anna, and this is the way how I started working on this project. But also I worked with other publicly available oral testimonies, different stories that were shared in public that initially brought my attention to this topic. But certainly, you know that since the beginning of the full-scale invasion in 2022, there are much more different oral history and documentation projects. And this war certainly has already been named as the most documented war. And looking at one side of the stories as material objects that people are telling the stories about, we can also try to understand, zoom into one of the sides of their stories that they're telling in these testimonies. So I'm very grateful for all participants of this project that gathered all of these testimonies, made them available to these research institutions, and this great resource that would help certainly move forward with oral histories of war. Also, I should say at the beginning that these stories represent one of the examples of the narratives of war, and there are certainly many others of those that are not represented, of such different social groups that were not interviewed, or people that decided not to share their stories. We still don't know other sides of stories that people are keeping to themselves, and we'll see what kind of stories we can tell based on the testimonies and of the projects that we could gather. And when I started looking at the interviews, I come up with a list of questions that are related to that interviewers were asking the respondents. Each of the projects certainly has its focus and specifics, either related to age of the respondents, gender, or professional status in Ukraine. And what is also important in all of these oral histories and documentation projects, one of the questions which the interviewers are asking is about personal belongings that refugees took with them when fleeing. Also, these questions could be very different. They are varied a bit from each other. They have lots of in common. And in this slide, you could see like 5 different questions that could be related to the histories of objects that became central for personal histories. For instance, a person could be asked, what did you take with you? What did you take with you to Lviv on the trip? What could you take? Another interview would be asking, what did your little suitcase look like? Was it separate for you, separate for the child, or how did it look like? Or did you just put everything on one place, just in case, to later pack it into the bag? There could be much more detailed questions. How did you make such a suitcase, and what do you put in it? Did you just have an intuition about what was needed, or did someone advise you? So certainly these questions allowed already to think about all kinds of possible answers that person can tell. Later building on the concepts of materialities of survival that I was developing in my research on Soviet famines and materiality of survival during Soviet famines, I was started thinking about what kind of questions and reflections to start with this project. So I decided to expand this concept of famine materiality to the concept of war materiality based on the scholarships that I already shown you. I didn't also focus on the life stories of material objects that could be another direction of this scholarship of history of objects and history of war through objects. But instead, here in this part of research, I'm focusing on histories of women relationships with objects and how this object could tell us the histories of personal life and flight from war in the current days. So I was looking into the interviews and thinking about questions such as what objects did women remember, why these objects, what role did they play in the stories of their survival, displacement, and loss, and how can these stories contribute to our understanding of the current war of Russia's aggression against Ukraine, and how those stories could help build some kind of solidarity networks between Ukrainian refugees in the region and globally. Listening to these interviews and reading these interviews, I noticed several common topics that I would like to discuss with you today. One of the possible topics that people were talking about was about their contemporary necessities. Usually, our understanding about the refugees and their material belongings is usually related to very familiar to many of us museum exhibitions of displaced persons after the Second World War, how they arrived to different countries with just one suitcase, with very few possessions. And it might be just few little things, some clothes, and a few personal items. And today, the image of contemporary refugee has changed substantially, and it is a different one. As you can see from the stories that people are telling, and I put a few quotes into this slide. For instance, when one woman, a lawyer from Kiev, was asked whether she had packed her safe suitcase and how it looked like, she responded, "Of course, I took it for myself. I packed the laptop since I had to travel for studying. I had this small backpack where the laptop fit, along with documents, diplomas, chargers, a mouse, and a first aid kit." And and another woman from Mariupol told when responding similar questions that I packed a little, a bit of underwear, a jeans, a sweater, a towel, and some jewelry. So as you can see, all of these stories are related to contemporary necessities, but still they could be different. But certainly looking back to in history, we see quite a big difference with what people would be usually taking with them 50 years ago, 100 years ago, and how their lives changed already since then. Also, what's important that many of the stories share the same attachment to material objects, which I called symbolic practicalities. So this would be another example of human material relations amidst the war, when story of one symbolic item, like a pocket knife, as you could see on this slide, which women packed in her suitcase, became very important to this woman. So I quote, she is telling, I went through this little suitcase, checked what I had and what I was missing. Matches, something else. I decided I was missing a pocket knife. I had this big, beautiful pocket knife from my dad, but it was completely dull. I thought, well, you never know what situations might come up, opening something, cutting something like a piece of bread, and not having a knife with you. End of quote. So in this context, as you can see, the pocket knife could be viewed here as an excellent representation of symbolic practicalities. While its intended use was practical to cut bread, open some items, it also held symbolic value for this person, a sentimental connection to her father. And also it's a story of her personal life, of her family before the war. So it's this objects could be a way to tell the story about a past that was very important for these people. Another story, certainly this relates to my research on the history of Soviet famines and materiality of survival during Soviet famines, is the stories of loss. In this slide, I put a quote from a person, a respondent, which story caught my attention. This unique story about material object. This person was 24-year-old woman, an architect by profession from Kharkiv, and when reflecting on the consequences of the loss of her personal and family property during the war, she told, I quote, I have been sitting myself during the last week with an idea that I do not have any property and own place, so it would be easier because I lost all that. End of quote. And she also continues further. A feeling of space, a feeling of home, all was lost. During this time, I have been reminded of home maximum 5 times. There is some special tricks, such as when we made a salad for the first time for everyone. Those dishes that we usually cook at home. End of quote. So here, even we don't have this material object that person is mentioning in particular, she is mentioning a sense of home, a feeling of home that was lost due to the war. And here, a loss of home, a sense of home was a very common trope in oral testimonies. Even if respondents were not asked about it as a story of material objects that they brought with themselves. And also here, a woman doesn't mention what kind of object she would like to have or what object was lost. Her feeling of loss is deeply material. And this connection that we can build with the history of Holodomor survivors, because in their testimonies that were documented 50, 70, 80 years after the famine, as it was in early 30s, and usually these stories were documented since late 80s through 1990s, 2000s. People still have this deep sense of material loss because they lost different family valuables, different objects, very small like earrings or different type of very tiny objects, but they would still have this deep feeling of material loss even 50, 70, like 80 years ago. So for me, as looking into the stories, I would say that these feelings of loss would be a major part of oral testimonies for many people 50, 70 years ago after even the war. So it's important to understand the stories and personal motivations of their histories. Another important topic is related certainly to the histories of trauma that could be told from the perspective of histories of objects that people are talking about. And this is certainly not surprising. One respondent does not want even to gain any material objects just because of an early traumatic experiences of loss. After leaving Kharkiv in the first months of war for the Western Ukraine, a woman was still feeling stressed out and decided that she would not want to gain any excessive possessions and establish any material attachments, any emotional attachments to material objects. And here she put her idea and her understanding of this personal story of loss and trauma very vividly. You can see this quote on this slide. And all of this their time, I keep telling myself that I don't have anything to lose again. So you kind of get used to it, and when you don't have it again, it's easier. If you constantly remind yourself that you don't own anything, then you have nothing to lose. End of quote. So how usually also people, you could see from the testimonies, people are also trying to cope with this feeling of material loss, of trauma. While for some women, feeling of loss was central in their recollections of the war experiences, some would try immediately while they were telling the story to cope with their emotions or tell the story of how they tried to cope with recently. For a journalist and historian from Irpin, in particular, was important to protect her library. Although she was not able to move to save it and move these books into storage, she decided to make a photograph of the library and preserve this photograph in her memory, and in this way to preserve the library, at least its visual image. And in her story, in her explanation why she decided to do it, she was alluding to some Eastern practices. So she was saying, and I just, that last evening or day, took photos of a few shelves of books, like, well, at least something. I even posted two pictures on Facebook, and now I'm like, there is these exercises on the internet, how to protect your home and you know, create an avatar, transfer it. There some kind of Eastern practices. And I'm like, well, please stay safe, even if you will be a little damaged. End of quote. So for this person, was important to save the visual image of her valuable objects, of her material items that she preserved and collected throughout her life in order to remember them. What also important that when we are looking into the scholarship, into the theory, how to tell the stories and how to understand the histories of material objects and war, Laura Auslander and Tara Zara, whom I already mentioned, wrote that survivors cherish their objects and seek out this object because they think that these objects would provide a different kind of knowledge than would a history told in words. And they wrote further, they need them for many of the activities that are unrelated to physical survival, but that define humanness, including writing, making music, art, working, and communicating. And they also wrote that people need those stories, those things to store memories. So as we could see from the previous example, the photo of library is a story how to store memories about personal war experiences. So what cannot and what can these objects tell us about materiality, about war, about personal histories? What cannot be seen from these testimonies, but what can these stories of material objects tell researchers, society, and those people in particular to understand about their experiences? Looking from the perspective of material objects, we can also see how the war impacts the lifespan of the objects themselves. It disrupts their life cycle, it ends their individual biographies, it adds connection with their owners. As we can see from many of these histories, people have the sense of their ending of their stories with material objects that they cherish, that they collected during their lives. As Tara Zara and Laura Auslander wrote, we cannot truly understand the dynamics and consequences of war without considering the centrality of material culture to violent context. And indeed, as I tried to show on the very beginning of the presentation, we are dealing here with different sense of material objects. As it's not only a rubble, it's not only damaged houses, but it's also very tiny objects that are central for personal sense of belonging to a particular place, to a particular geographic location that is related to human histories and all life. Through narrating their stories of war via these material objects, women contributed to creation of a shared, publicly accessible narrative of survival and forced migration. They fostered with the stories solidarity networks that could be built between Ukrainian refugees across different regions and with refugees worldwide. Women histories of material loss do not only allow us to recreate their material lives before the war, but they also can allow us to build the imagined material archive, like one of the respondents tried to do on her own, to build this imagined museum, a collection of lost materiality, and try to recreate the story and make sense of what was lost and what could be preserved and what could be recreated if possible. Those objects can also tell us very vividly about the deeply personal connections of their owners with them, their sense of belonging again, as I just mentioned, to their geographic location. They also tell us about the dynamism of war, that is not a still event. It is a process when the meaning also of the scenes are constantly changing, as well as a sense of urgency, why it is important to take this object and why it doesn't matter anymore. By looking at the stories of women's relations with these objects, we can also see the impact of forced migration on self of belonging. We do also see how these objects are reshaped and resignified the scenes that surrounded people, and how people are making new attachments to material objects or decide not to have attachments at all. These scenes helped women narrate their personal stories, their histories, and they helped us to understand their very troubling emotions. Thank you so much for your attention. I'm very looking forward for your questions and very grateful for everyone who was a part of this project and documented these histories, and certainly to the respondents who shared such personal histories with them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Iryna. It was absolutely fascinating, and I have 2 pages of notes to share them maybe later, but I will now use the privilege of having the mic and being a chair, because I have some reflections, and maybe less questions, but more reflections on what I heard that I want to share with you, and you might take them for later or respond during the discussion. So I was being an oral historian who has conducted like hundreds of interviews with people who experienced various types of displacement. I all the time was thinking about the many I don't know, cross points or points of when these experiences actually might be compared, or when putting them together can actually tell us a lot about what's happening now. So I was thinking about this practicalities, these practical things that people take with them when they leave their home, thinking that, okay, it's for a few years, maybe it's forever, maybe for a few months. And these practicalities change over the time, which means that when I was thinking about the stories from the Second World War, it was sewing kit or kitchen utensils, and now they are being replaced by laptop and diplomas, because this is what people need for work. But people take these practical things and they reflect about the fact of taking them and thinking about them, because they might, in a way, save their life at some point. But the symbolic items kind of remain in the basket. You mentioned this quote about the pocket knife. It was a symbolic object, also practical, but also symbolic in a way. And I was thinking about all these absolutely unnecessary things from the practical point of view, which have been taken, like caps or photos. We now store our photos digitally usually, but I heard a number of stories about taking a photo in the frame with you, which was absolutely illogical, unnecessary. But a person takes this photo because for some reasons it might later become this object from the previous life that, as Tara Zara and Laura Auslander mentioned, might become this object that helps to store memories physically also. And I was also thinking about this object from the past stories from the 40s or the 50s, which were also, I mean, these objects were also unnecessary, but they were taken because for a while they seemed to be more important than practical objects that could really save the life of a person. But they were taken, and the place they took in this luggage was taken from this practical object to accommodate something that was not important, like religious picture, or I don't know, there were many objects that played this kind of role. Yeah, and saving to remember, the title of one of your slides was very accurate and moving, because actually I'm thinking about these people who are taking a real or imagined picture of what is going to be lost in few, I don't know, in few minutes, in few days. Now you can actually take a picture of your flat that is going to be left. In the past, people could not take the picture, but I heard many stories when people remember this moment of having a last look of the house. And now they were sitting with me, I don't know, 80, 70 years after they left this house, and they were saying, so I'm closing my eyes now and I still see this picture of the house that I last saw 80 years ago. So there is this imagined picture also of what was left, that is fulfilling certain features, certain roles now. I have a lot of questions, but I will ask only 2 now. I was wondering whether you encountered in your research people who experience multiple displacement. And of course, I think about people who already twice lost their home, meaning in 2014, and then they were displaced. They left their houses and they moved to central, to western Ukraine, and then they were displaced once again now. And how these stories about possibly twice displacement, the stories concerning the objects differ from stories of losing your house, losing your home only once. And I'm, of course, thinking about possible connections. I'm thinking about, of course, Jewish histories of the Second World War. We tend to understand the Jewish history of Second World War as the predominantly history of the genocide, but it's also a history of losing the objects, the personal belongings, houses, whatever a person could possess, the person could lose during the Holocaust multiple times. And I was also wondering whether you are interested in animals. Of course, animals are not classical objects, but at least in our interviews, there are countless stories about the animals that were taken or could not be taken. And some of the most moving or touching stories I heard were not about losing people, but about losing animals that could not be saved for various reasons. So I was just wondering whether this is also the field that you are going to research. And okay, once again, thank you for a fascinating talk, and we might exchange many reflections later, but now I will just open the floor to the audience. And I think that we might gather maybe 3 first questions, and they will answer, and we'll see how it goes.
Okay, should I answer your questions, or we're collecting?
Yeah, maybe you can start, and then we'll collect the questions. You're right.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Anna. I also made a one page of different comments that you made. Was really lots of historical connections. First of all, thanks to your experience of studying a Second World War and Jews and how they survived the Holocaust. And certainly, I was not trained specifically and was not studying this from the perspective of Second World War. But what I was looking was not specifically war-related experiences, but the histories of the Soviet famines in Ukraine, how those histories also could be told from the perspective of material objects. And here we could see this connection of how these objects were lost. And for me, was what was specifically very kind of a troubling sign that looking at this testimonies today, I was thinking that it will be something with which people will be dealing many more years to come. Similarly, like with related histories of the Holodomor and other Soviet famines. What's also like interesting that you mentioned, I have not time to explain it in this presentation, that indeed many people have the stories of multiple displacements in Ukraine. And one of the stories was of a person that I mentioned briefly from Mariupol. She was she had this experience of not a displacement, but she already knew what was war since 2014. And when the war, this new war started in 2022, she was explaining that she was not actually packing a suitcase because this war was already there with them for a number of years. So for even people knew these histories from like very deeply and were living with the war for years already. They decided not to pack anything. So for them, it was already a part of their life. Some people also from Donetsk and Luhansk region who moved to Kyiv in particular, they already knew what to do, and they started sharing the stories with their colleagues at work, with their friends. and in some ways they already kind of give them knowledge and understanding what is important to take with a person when you are fleeing. For instance, I remember there was one story of a woman who was, I guess, from Lugansk region, from one of the cities, and when the war started in 2014, she was on vacation, and she was not able to come back home because of war, and she had with her only summer clothes, something like, yeah, not related to work at all. And for this person it was memorable, as I can see from her story to her colleague, that she specifically mentioned that you have to be ready to get specifically a different kind of clothes not related to vocation, and for this reason people were much more aware of different situations. Yeah, I will look certainly to the connections with Jewish history of the Second World War and the histories of their material laws that could kind of build these bridges between histories of Ukrainian refugees, and what I think that it would allow researchers to build these connections of solidarity between different stories. And as for animals, it's also a part of my personal history. Because I was able to bring my cat from Ukraine with me to Canada, then to Australia. So it's very also a difficult story, and I published a very small essay about it. And certainly animals are part of the stories, although they are not material or like objects per se, but they are even much more personal to people. You are very right. And also stories of animals and how animals help people to survive is also a part of my research on famines. And the article is coming up next year in the Journal of East-West Ukrainian Studies. So I'm happy to talk more about animals, but I see many hands, and I'm looking forward to hear comments as well. Thank you.
Yes, so we will collect 3 questions, Ella, Julia, and Natalia. So please unmute yourself, and then Iryna will answer.
So Iryna, дуже дякую. Thank you a lot for your research, and I'm really glad that you know, the interviews that we gathered are already studied. My question is about denial, because you mentioned that sometimes some things, material things that people gathered with them were symbolic or just simply useful. But I had one example when one lady, it was she was in complete denial of the war. So she just when she was packing her children, she just thought it's just for a dacha, like summer house, 2 weeks holiday. And it was it was right in the beginning of the war. So she just packed very light clothes for her children, and then she had some problems because of that. But she was in complete denial. So she did not pack any useful things and any symbolic things. So if you would be interested in this case, you know, you can add this to your, you know, collection of sources. So thank you a lot for your very interesting and important presentation. Thank you.
Should we collect a few more? I cannot answer.
Yes, I think that we'll collect 3. So Julia and Natalia.
Okay, firstly, dear Iryna, thank you very much for your presentation. Very interesting and very touching emotionally the material. And also I previously I didn't think about think that this topic of material things or some is so sensitive. We have a different experience of war, but I saw on the audience, and I feel myself how it's how these materials is very sensitive, very like touching, very different things. And also I was thinking that your findings and your results and your ideas from your research is a kind of test of for what we how do we understand person or people in this catastrophic situation. And it's not difficult, not simple to like limit yourself in such a view. And that is why I will be very interested in the development of your research. I have two like comments and one question, or maybe also two questions. Firstly, thank you for this sharing the books which you used on the beginning of your research. And I understand that the historical like research is very useful now for us to understand the why is a specific everyday experience, specific situation, so on. But I am interested in how do you for yourself understand and define the limits of this historical material for using it in sociological or anthropological or memory studies research. For me, it's also like important things, very interesting. How do you think about this? Also, my comment was, another comment was about a kind of interdisciplinarity of your topic. For example, this is also, you mentioned that this topic is also about the losses of people, and losses is also a topic for legal studies and also for possibility to I don't know, return some these losses after war ended. And do you think about this? And also, my question: you said that you read a lot of this interview with people about this things, and if you find some explanation or of motivation, what people take and took, and what people left. Did you find the motivation of like sacrificing? I mean that I understand that I cannot put all from what I want, what is valued for me, and I left something, and this is like sacrificing as a payment as a payment for the saving yourself. Thank you very much for your presentation and possibility to ask the question. Thank you.
Thank you so
Dear
much,
Iryna,
Iryna.
thank you for joining us today. It was such a pleasure to listen to your talk, and well, it was really emotional and also touching, because I can recognize some of the ladies whom you quoted from the interviews that I've conducted. And it's also a very interesting methodological experience as well for a scholar to listen to someone working with the material that they've collected. And I think it might be one of the practical talks and topics for us to discuss. So thank you for, well, making those stories alive. And it was really, really important for me personally as well as for a scholar. And I have also some comments and questions. And first, Anya's question about animals triggered me to think also about the plants. And I immediately remembered the research by Daria Cymbaluk and all of the plants and landscapes that people are missing as well. Because you can take your cat, but you cannot take your garden. You cannot take the apple tree that your grandfather planted 50 years ago. So it's also about this multiplicity of losses that the war causes people, not only losing your house and material possessions, but also the landscape and surrounding. And I also can recall some of the interviews from another project, which is not a war-related project, but it partially touches upon the stories of people who left Lviv after the Second World War. And the image which stood with me profoundly was the story of one of architecture professors who left the city in 1946. And his mother took him to the uphill of Lychakiv and asked him to look closer at the landscape and panorama of the city and took it with him. And I think it's also very important how you can remember certain things beyond taking them physically with you. So this kind of memory devices that you apply in order to stay connected to some symbolic locations. And I think it's also for us a very important way to reconnect ourselves to others who left the cities that we inhabit now. In case of Lviv, or like the Holocaust history can become much closer when we think about these losses that people experienced back then and we are experiencing now. And my questions are, the first one, this story of a knife, I think it's very, very interesting and important because it shows you partially the way how people might imagine the future displacement. So you need to cut something, you need to open something. And partially it's a lot about imagination of what does displacement and war means. And why so many people left Kyiv, for instance, to the nearby villages, because they thought that it will be safer for them to stay in the countryside. So the images of the war, the previous wars and survival somehow influence our decisions, what we might need or not need while we are displaced. So I'm thinking about this question is about the certain imagination and the sources for this imagination of what does displacement mean. And another question is more about the practices of reconnecting to the new environment. I can also recall one of the interviews when the lady returned to her apartment, or at least she imagined the way how she will return to her apartment and reappropriate it back after it was left. So I'm also thinking about the way how people might reappropriate the spaces, which might be temporary for them, like buying the same cup that they had in their own apartment, or buying something completely different, but something that they needed or imagined as some important to reconnect back to their lost home. So the way how people might reconnect to certain, like an opposite to denial, but rather practice of gaining back the sense of belonging that might be lost due to the war. And thank you again for this wonderful talk. Looking forward to your reflections.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I probably will start responding, and then we collect right on a few other questions, few rounds. Thank you so much. I'm going into the in the order of the questions were asked. So, Elżbieta, for your question, and certainly I agree with you that the topics that the themes I decided to present today, they are not presenting every story, and it's just to start. But also, like even just to start, it's not possible to represent all stories that those narratives are including. It would be very difficult and would be very challenging. But what you mentioned is a story of denial. It could be much more than just one individual story, and indeed. Many people were not emotionally ready to witness what was they have to face in a few days, and that's why. And also, it could be linked to the public discussions at the time. Still, many people would come very difficult to believe that something would really happen like at such scale. And many of the stories that I read as a part of this project Testimonies of the War, they really have the same discussions that we have the discussions at war, at work, at home, but we really didn't believe that something like this happened, and that's why it explains the stories why they were not ready to pack their safe suitcases. Even the stories were discussed on TV, on different media. Authorities were discussing this in different contexts, but still people were not ready to actually take a step and think really about it. Yeah, so I think that this idea, this should be certainly represented with much more nuances and would give more sense understanding about the different stories.
I was just about to help, not to say that what you are doing is wrong, just to
Yeah.
add, just
Yeah,
another
not
thought for you.
totally. Yeah, not to judge. It's not a story of judgment and saying that it's a wrong or right decision, but still it's a personal choice, right? And it was important and a way to understand why person decided not to park for what reasons and what would be the consequences of such decisions, right? As you mentioned, for families. Yeah, and thank you, Yulia, for your comments on interdisciplinarity. And indeed, as you see, my training is completely focused on history, and I'm not a sociologist. I am not specifically trained in oral history. I'm not sociologist. I worked also quite a lot with testimonies of famine survivors. But still, I was working with the stories that we already documented. Like here, I asked colleagues to get access to some interviews. So for me, it's also in a way, as coming back to Natalia's comment, is a way how we are working with these testimonies. When I was working, for instance, with famine testimonies, I was thinking that hundreds and hundreds, like even thousands of these testimonies are collected, and we are not actually engaging in the analysis of them. We do not know actually what objects help people to survive. And same here, I think it would be also important to introduce different methods from different fields of research and start looking into these testimonies from different perspectives. And this would certainly help bring different stories and understand and people and their decisions from different points of view, as being historian, or as being lawyer, or as being a sociologist or psychologist. That would certainly be beneficial for people themselves and for scholars and for developing understanding about the war and its trauma and consequences of this trauma on people and society. Like for this reason, I think it would be also important to cooperate at some point with lawyers, and if lawyers would look into these testimonies and would try to understand what stories are people telling about their material loss, and try to bring these cases to courts and make some difference to people that lost their homes and houses and really valuable material belongings. So probably, hopefully, this would be another stage of this research for people who are specialized in this area. And for Natalia, I think that stories of animals are certainly very different, and stories of plants. I remember research by Daria very vividly, and I was talking with her quite a lot when she was sharing the stories of how people were bringing plants with them even when moving. So it was like very impressed me at the time, yeah, so like we can think of different material objects, right, beyond this physical object that is not alive, but different kind of objects that people might bring with them. It could be a stone, it could be a muscle, it could be anything that is valuable and help them to make connection to the place. Something that you just mentioned, to remember the place and to remember the landscape, and because for many of these people, these landscapes are related not just with a moment of life, but with decades of their lives. That's why the stories are so deeply touching, they're so nuanced and emotional. So even like tiny objects is very representative of personal history. And story of knife, yeah, it's also impressed the story me a lot because it really says about history of survival, something that like person is already starting to think what I'm going to do with this knife. Even this person was living in the city and it seems like doesn't have enough, different experiences of, living in the countryside, survival strategies. But also there was some stories I remember I was reading in, not as a part of this project, but I guess in the articles published in Ukraina Moderna website from people who experienced occupation in the first months of war in 2022 from Chernihiv region, and people were trying to make connections also with the histories of the Holodomor that their families have, and they try to preserve food. These food strategies related to experiencing famine were also very central how people coped with war in the first months in 2022. So many of these connections of survival were coming up, and it also says us a lot about this continuing violence and all of these ideas of circles of trauma and laws that people in Ukraine, in the region in general, experiencing during 20th and now 21st century. So it's certainly something very, very, it's talking about long duration history in a way that we would not certainly expect to talk about nowadays. I probably will stop here, and yeah, would be great to hear from you later. Thank you, Natalia, Julia, and Elzbieta for your comments.
Yeah, we now can accommodate more questions, but I just wanted to reflect on two things. The first one is that when we talk about seeing these bridges between the past experience and the contemporary experience, there are two, in my understanding at least, there are two separate things. So the first thing is that, okay, so I'm a researcher. Methodologically, these are two separate things, issues. Okay, so I'm a researcher and I'm looking at my interviews that I conducted with people who experienced World War II. Now I'm looking at the interviews that I've conducted now, and I see the similarities. I'm making these bridges, but what we also not so often, but still, what we also saw in our contemporary interviews is when actually our interviewees are seeing these bridges. So what you mentioned this issue when people from Chernihiv region kind of made these associations with what happened during the Holodomor and the fact that, okay, so my grandma survived because she preserved some, I don't know, some vegetables, and now I'm also gathering some food to survive. So we have also encountered several times, I think, this connections made by our interviewees. So they saw the similarities between what their families experienced and what they are experiencing now. And sometimes it was about the objects. It was about the food. It was also about the fact that okay, so my grandma was actually talking to me about how she was packing in 1939, and now it didn't help me much because we are packing different things now. But I remembered this story when I was packing my suitcases, and somehow it resonated with me. So there are these two different, although talking to each other situations. And I also want to agree with Natalia that it's wonderful when you see that the interviews you conducted are starting to be analyzed by someone else. It's great. And this is also why we I think call our project documentary project first of all, and in the second and only after that a research project. Okay, so we'll collect now more questions. I believe we should have some questions. So raise your hand if you
yeah, I can't figure out how to make the electronic hand
Yeah.
work. So
yeah.
okay,
Sure.
thank you. Yes, I live in California, and many of you may have heard about our wildfires that we have here. And I've lost 2 homes, and 2 complete communities have burned down during the fires. So I can really identify with what you're talking about in today's session. And it really struck me how you talked about people feel like they've lost about how objects are more than mere things, that they store memories. And the biggest thing that I feel that, like, all my childhood friends and adult friends in the 2 different communities, they all lost their homes. We lost the schools, the businesses, everything, just like in Ukraine during the war. And sure, there's certain little memories, little things we may have in our home that are our own, that store memories. But the biggest loss was the sense of other than life, because we lost 85 people passed away in the first fire. But is the sense of community. When you talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, there's the physiological needs, and then we have our safety needs, and then there's a sense of belonging. And so that's why your talk really touched me, Iryna, because I think that's what we're talking about here, is the sense of belonging. When, I mean, sure, people do take things for practical reasons, of course, but when you've mentioned anything for sentimental reasons, we become one with our homes, with our communities. And when that is all destroyed, many people feel that they've lost parts of themselves when they lose the physical objects. And that's part of what they need, what they end up processing throughout the why they're grieving. So objects are more than, I agree with you, they're more than mere things. They do store memories, and the psychological importance and value of them can actually help save lives, in that they can help give people that desire to continue living, which is so important. It can help you in your resilience to want to live and to be an inspiration, because everyone is scattered. There's never going to be that spot where everyone comes back again. Even if you can rebuild buildings and cities, you've lost your community as it was. And so I think these symbolic objects, I just think the importance of your project is so important from a historical standpoint, as well as to help people who do read about this, who have suffered loss, to understand they're not, you know, if maybe they might feel guilty, like their neighbor lost their life and they're feeling survivor's guilt, that they're grieving having lost their home or possessions, but it's all together, because loss is loss. And it's not just the house, it's not just the knickknack, it's the memories and the oneness that we all are so interconnected. So that's what I just wanted to share, that I really, I saw your link on LinkedIn, your invitation to come to this. And it's, let's see, 2:00 in the morning here where I am in California, but I just was so drawn to your talk, and I'm really glad I came, because I think this is very valuable. And I'm very connected, and I support Ukraine. And I have since the beginning in many ways. And I just felt this was an important talk to come to. So thank you for putting it together and conducting your research. And I've taken many notes, typed up many notes during your talk.
We have a question in the chat that I missed, but I want to read it now. But before I read it, I just want to agree with Brigitte that yes, it's all about the sense of belonging. Definitely, it's not about the object. It's about the community, about losing something, and objects are also are only pars pro toto. I mean, they represent something that we are losing, the bigger something that we are losing. And I was just wondering, and it's not the question I think that Iryna can answer now, but maybe it's kind of a trope to follow later. I was just wondering how much it matters what was the reason of the disaster. Because I mean, it might matter whether it was a neighbor who stole your dress during the Holocaust, whether it was a fire that happened and it took your house, it took your neighbors, or whether it was an enemy that invaded your country. So, I mean, the loss is a loss. I mean, you are losing it anyway. So, emotionally and personally, maybe it does not matter. But I was just wondering whether we can see some well, whether it matters in our analysis what was the reason of losing this object. And I will just read the question now from the chat. So it was from Ina Ganshow from Luxembourgish team of our project. So question to the speaker about the diaries. Did anyone take physical diaries with them, or was speaking about the electronic diaries that they have kept? So that was the second question, and we can collect the third question, and Iryna will answer. So whoever is the third in the round, please unmute yourself and ask the question. Yeah, Angela.
Yes, hello everyone. Iryna, thank you very much for your presentation. It's really, I have a short question. Do you have, through your research or during these testimonies, you have seen some moments where the people, during the interview, they change the meaning, the sense of these objects, or if they could feel these objects with different senses during the interviews? I can say some words about one example. For example, that the mother, she explained she escaped together with her son, and she has taken some special things for her child, but during their traveling, she used, and a lot of people could, she with these things think she could support other people, and for her it was something new, and she gave a lot of new sense to this story.
Well, thank you everyone for such fascinating and very nuanced and such thoughtful comments and reflections. Starting from Brigitte comment about fires, it's indeed also like very common and is ongoing in the western part of Melbourne. Really now there are fires. And people also losing their houses, and the stories that you are telling is also very troubling, like given that at least what I understand, losing material object during war is kind of more understandable in a way, because it's war, it's extreme military conflicts, it's major existential crisis caused by enemy, but here a losing house in peaceful time, it's very different. And I guess it would be interesting to compare the stories of people who experience loss of materiality and their houses in particular caused by natural disasters like fires, like floods, and the stories of people who experiences this loss amidst the war and contemporary context, which is also very different when we are comparing with the Second World War, because we don't have this emotional attachments as researchers, as Anna mentioned, to this topic, because we are also living through this time. But also we have these tools to document these histories as members of this project were doing immediately. And those stories are very fresh, they are very nuanced, they are very emotional. And this is something that we might be also liking when we are looking into historical examples, and some of these emotional connections, this language about the object could be already lost when people would be writing about this histories like even a few years later in their diaries, but taking the stories immediately, almost like a few weeks or like months later after person has fled the home region, I think it also gives much more nuances to the stories, and is very valuable what you are doing with this documentation project. It's indeed documentation project. So I would say, for Angela's question regarding diaries and regarding meanings of objects and how they changed during the personal history of flight, I do not remember specifically like many of them, but people were also like telling the stories how they were caught up unexpectedly by the war while they were just returning from vacation, or they were traveling in Ukraine and they don't have enough material like objects or clothes even to fly. So all of these changes are in relationship with objects. They are also telling us about dynamism of war, that we are not talking about something that is still, that it is not changing, but it's indeed the stories of how a person changes and how this relationship of urgency with material objects, sense of urgency, is also changing constantly, and person is reassessing the need of this object, whether to take or not. And actually I remember there was one story as that person during the week before the invasion, she was reassessing whether she would need to take this or that objects, and she was packing and unpacking her suitcase. So it was like a really emotional history, and it was telling a story of difficult choices what people are making even before the war, and how they make these decisions about the practical use of objects and about their value. Yeah, it's indeed very powerful to see at such stories, to look at such stories. And Ina's questions about diaries, I don't really remember, to be honest, about diaries that people were taking with themselves. I know from other projects and also like from personal history that people are taking family photographs and albums with them. But I don't remember diaries, because probably also like we are talking mostly about like ordinary people that are not keeping diaries, and we are not talking about like events happening like 50, 70 years ago. People are not writing diaries anymore, most of them. And we are dealing now here with another materiality. Probably we have to look into telephones, to the memories that people are keeping with themselves, because I'm not writing a diary myself as well, but I have telephone which keep all of these memories, notes, and all of that, as many of you here. So yeah, it's also important to discuss like with scholars looking into these objects as telephones. And I know that Center of Urban History is making a project on Telegram and documenting different charts in internet. So maybe there is something to look into telephones and try to understand what people preserve. But also it might be very challenging given that people were escaping occupation zones and they have to delete all memories and telephone, different chart, different histories. And they are actually talking about this loss in their interviews. They are talking about loss of some photographs that they have to delete in order to escape from occupation zone, because they have this filtration and checkpoints. So it was really very contemporary context that we actually have to discuss how to talk and how to research about this material loss of contemporary technologies of their preservation. Well, thank you so much for allowing me to think about. I was not even thinking about it when I was reading the testimonies, but it helped me to actually think through. Thank you.
I do know of a young woman who kept a diary, and she was displaced and ended up in Kyiv. She was a teenager who I taught English to. So if you're ever interested in her diary, I can connect the two of you.
Thank you so much, Bridget. Yeah, I will make connection with you.
And I do know about, and this is my mistake, I don't remember whether it's Latvian or Lithuanian project about diaries specifically. So they were interested in researching diaries that people continue to write during the Russian full-scale invasion, but they also kind of asked people to write the diary of what was happening to them when they already arrived in Latvia or Lithuania, one of these two countries. But what I also remember is that this project was not really successful in attracting people who would be willing to keep traditional diary. And it makes me wonder about what Iryna just said, that, I mean, this materiality has been changing, is changing right before our eyes. And the diary, of course, was important in the 30s, 40s, 50s, when that was a usual tool to preserve your thoughts through your reflection. But today it would be unlikely for a kind of standard person to keep a diary. And even if it was a diary, it would be most likely digital. I mean, I'm really making notes with a pen. This is what I thought when the question about diary appeared. So, I mean, even if we could have a diary today, most likely it wouldn't be a diary that we reflects our imagination of a diary from the 40s or the 50s. It would be just a file on your desktop. So I just mean that we need to take care about to consider this changing materiality, but it's also a specific topic to reflect on in the research. More questions?
Well,
We still have some
it's
time.
not a question, but just to clarify, if someone interested in the issue of diaries, my colleague at the Center for Urban History, Bogdan Shumilovich, started a project with his students at Ukrainian Catholic University. So it was one of the coping strategies for them when they wrote diaries together with those students. And the book was published, and partially I think this book is open access. And also some of those diaries are available at the webpage of the Center for Urban History after registration. So if someone is interested in the topic, I encourage you to check that one. And also the project that Anya mentioned, it was from Tartu University by Lina Kaosar. So also just to connect some of you if you're really into this topic.
I'm also right now just thinking about the book Diaries of Pandemic, Dzienniki Pandemii, written in Polish. I mean, the diaries were written in Polish, but once again, I'm just thinking about the fact that in the past, diaries were written spontaneously. It was just, I mean, people needed to keep these reflections, to somehow preserve their feelings, and they were the immediate thought was that, okay, so I'm just going to start a diary. And now I'm not talking that these projects are not happening, but they are the very activity of writing a diary is not anymore spontaneous. As you said, it might be a coping strategy, kind of people are inspired to do it by someone from outside. Okay, so Bogdan thought about this idea, and the students were inspired. And I'm not kind of neglecting the fact that it helped the students. The same concerned this Diaries of Pandemic book. There was an open call for participation published in the press, in the social media, and they received like hundreds of these diaries, but they were inspired. So this is the source that we are what's the sociological term if the source is not what we saw somewhere, but we are... Natalia, please help me. Źródło wywołane. What is the... Okay, I'm just missing the word.
Like
Okay.
an artifact,
Yeah,
social artifact.
we are producing the source. We are kind of calling the source to living, and it's not existing when we think about researching something. So that's the difference. I'm not sure whether I'm right now finding the right words to kind of define this difference, but I clearly see this difference between the diaries in the past and the diaries that are kept now because someone asked people to keep the diary because it might help, because it might be helpful for the project. So these are different activities. They are not less important or less helpful. They're just different, which is not...
Actually,
Yeah.
I think there's lots of diaries out there. We're dealing with a paradigm change, and the diaries of today are through social media. Yes, there's some people who do it like the influencers, okay, and it's generating income for them. But the vast majority of people, they're creating their living digital diaries. And it would be interesting to compare how, for instance, in World War II, we know the famous diary, and we know that the author did not live. And Anne Frank's diary became something that is shared all over the world. But there's so much of this full-scale invasion that has been shared with the world through social media, through people that we meet on LinkedIn, I don't do Facebook, but many people do, through people meet through social media, and they get a connection and they see the real pictures. So you think, oh, that's my connection, and he's in the military and he's showing us what's going on. Or you call it connecting with our friends. Are you okay? I heard Kyiv was missiles are there today. And so that would be an interesting issue. I don't know if it's too remote from your main topic, Iryna, but possessions. What are belongings? What are possessions? Digital is a possession, and that is actually helps people not only to get the word out and influence public opinion, but can help you bring your memories with you. And that was not possible back in those days when, like you said, spontaneous diaries where people chose to reflect between themselves and the pen and the paper. But, who are we really talking to? Are people really talking to the imagined masses out there that they think are interested in their own lives? Or are they processing their reality through this medium that we are being presented with? And so anyway, lots of layers of different interesting comparison and analogies there.
No, thank you. I just also was, while we were talking, I really agree with you about the need to study this digital materiality. We cannot certainly escape now. Everybody is talking about this need, but actually we really have these tools and understanding how to do it. And this would also need, we would need to unite our efforts with really specialists in this field. And being a historian, it might be very challenging to do such kind of research. But I would really wanted to see how this would go with materiality in particular, because materialities became less and less visible. It became digital. Indeed, even books, right? In many people don't have books anymore because either they are traveling, they are migrating, they are moving from countries, from regions, and even having library is a big treasure now. It's not available for everyone. But also what I was thinking about diary is that the context of war is very specific, and because of the war, many people who were living specifically in the occupation zones, they were not able to make their diaries, to write their diaries or any notes. And that's why it's also here we are liking the stories of people who were escaping these occupation zones, and they were not able to take these diaries, or even they understood that it is dangerous to have this diary in such circumstances. So in a way, we should think about what kind of stories we are not having in these archives, in these projects, because we really don't have enough understanding of what the life will look like under such circumstances, and what people were not telling, and what they can tell once they escaped. And it's also remind me the stories of people who of displaced population, displaced persons after the Second World War, who escaped the Soviet Union, and they already arrived in different countries, but they were still frightened to talk about the history of the famine of early 30s, the Holodomor, as we know it's called now, because they have relatives still in Ukraine. They were frightened to talk about it, and here we might be dealing with very similar examples. It would be like good to think about and even take in mind that we still don't have enough sense of what these diaries could look like, if those people can really tell what they live through, how their life looked like there. And one of the such examples, as many of people know, was a story of diary of a Ukrainian children writer Volodymyr Vakulenko from Izum, from Kharkiv region, who kept diary during occupation. And as you know, he was also like killed by the end of occupation of Kharkiv region. Is the result of such personal stories, personal copying strategies, and it's really important to understand the price of having such stories, and the consequences of this for people. Yeah, thank you.
I think that many layers of the future research are opening right now, so not sure whether all of that is for Iryna, but maybe for someone else. Definitely this digital materiality, this diaries, this historical connections, all of that is very important to keep in mind. Any more questions? We still can accommodate some. Not. Of course, our speaker might be available for later questions, I guess, by email. So if you cannot voice them now, or don't want to voice them now, or you are not ready with your questions, that just contact me or Iryna, and we'll be in touch. So if there are no immediate questions, I just wanted to thank you, Iryna, once again. It was an absolutely fascinating talk, and we had more than 50 participants, which was quite a big number. Also, taking under account that we changed the time of our seminar. So I am really grateful that you shared this preliminary result of your research, and I just wish a good luck to you in your research, and if you are able to accommodate like 10% of what was suggested to you, it's going to be a wonderful monograph and a wonderful set of articles. So good luck in your research, and I hope we'll stay in touch, and I hope that the interviews that we conducted will be of some help in what you're doing. And I'm looking forward to our next seminar in February. So just let's stay in touch, and and wait for the email announcing the next seminar that will be presenting some of the preliminary research and reflections from our own project. So once again, thank you so much for joining us today. The sun is just shining very brightly in my eyes. So thank you and have a good day. And as it was the first seminar in this year, I just want to wish all of you more peaceful and resourceful year for all of us, for Ukraine and for all our interviewees that needed to become displaced people, even though they didn't want to lose any material objects probably. So let us hope for reconnection and regaining the objects and the sense of belonging in this year, hopefully. Take care and thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Really a pleasure to meet and talk with you.